Welcome once again to Lehto's Law. Here's Steve Lehto.
Carvana is back in the news, not in a good way, at least not for them. Several people sent me a story from NBC5 out of Chicago. For the second time, Carvana is banned from selling cars in Illinois. The Illinois Secretary of State's office tells NBC5 it has suspended Carvana's license for a second time, meaning they cannot sell cars in the state till they get this resolved. If you sell a certain number of cars in the state, most states require you to get licensed as a car dealer. You're selling used cars, they make you get a used car dealer's license. In Michigan, they call it a B license. A, new cars, B, used cars. So Lisa Parker and Tom Jones wrote this story. For the second time in 2 months, Carvana has been banned from selling cars in the state of Illinois. They're known for their modern approach to selling cars with its towering vending machines and quippy TV ads. But in the last 2 months, their dealer license has been suspended twice by state officials in Illinois. The Secretary of State's office tells NBC5 it has suspended Carvana's license for a second time. And the Secretary of State said, "My top commitment is protecting the interests and well-being of Illinois consumers. I applaud the Illinois Secretary of State Police for their ongoing efforts to protect customers. We will continue to do everything we can to ensure that every customer is properly served." The problem is that Carvana's had quite a few customers complaining about how long it takes them to get titles to the vehicles they purchase. And there's also complaints involving the apparent misuse of out-of-state temporary tags. Now, we've heard about this in previous stories, that someone goes in and they buy a car from Carvana. And depending on what state you're in, the dealer has got to submit the title work to the state within so many days. And then the state processes it and sends the title wherever it's got to go. And also the vehicle gets registered. The registration stuff's got to get sent in, and then you would get your license plate. And a dealer can often issue a temporary tag to you to tide you over until your real plate comes. Those tags are usually limited to a number of days that they're good. So what happens is, in the past we've heard about this, people buy a car, they're driving the car with a temporary tag, and the tag expires. They don't get their stuff from the state. What's going on? So if you try to call the state, you'll never find out. It's impossible to get a hold of somebody at the state. So you call Carvana and they go, "Oh, we got a little bit of a problem here, but tell you what, we can give you another tag. Come on in." So you go in there, they give you another tag. We've actually heard of them giving people tags from other states, meaning that like, oh, I don't know, you're in Arizona and they give you a Nevada tag, which doesn't seem to make a whole lot of sense. And they would suggest, I think, that is in fact a misuse. But here it's the apparent misuse. The complaints mirror those from customers who contacted NBC5 for help this year. So there are a lot of people out there who are so frustrated, they've called Carvana, they've called the state, they called the news station. Now the news station doing a story might help, but when people complain to the state will often step in and investigate. Apparently, based on their investigation, they've decided that Carvana has in fact done something wrong, and they've done it wrong enough to where their license got suspended. After the state issued a suspension order on May 10th, after negotiating with the company, the Secretary of State issued a stay order effectively lifting that suspension so long as Carvana followed strict guidelines. Those guidelines included no longer issuing out-of-state tags for new vehicle sales. The Secretary of State's office said on Monday the company had failed to meet those guidelines and continued to conduct business in a manner that violates Illinois law. Carvana did not respond to NBC5's request for comment on the new suspension order. The new move by regulators will not impact sales made on or before July 18th. And here's the thing. When you get in trouble with an entity like the state or the Secretary of State or the DMV or whoever it might be that's on the other side of this, but they're a regulatory body, quite often you can work out an arrangement where you say, look, we'll agree to meet even stricter guidelines than what we had before if you'll let us keep doing business. And they'll say, fine, as long as you do that. If you break that agreement, that's when you're in trouble, because you generally lose your ability to negotiate a settlement because they're going to say, last time we did this, it didn't work. What are you going to do? Agree to abide by even stricter standards? And you didn't follow the previous ones. Why would you follow those? And so it's the old fool me once thing, you know? So vehicles that have already been purchased but not yet delivered can still be delivered to the purchasers during the suspension, but no new sales can occur in Illinois during the suspension order. That's from the Secretary of State of Illinois. The suspension will remain in place until these issues are resolved. NBC5 Responds has heard from many customers who said after purchasing cars from Carvana, they waited months for license plates. Customers, such as this one woman they talked to from Romeoville, said she waited 201 days for the title to her Jaguar, or Jaguar, as some people say. And here's the deal. The title quite often does come from the state. But the state kicks that out after someone sends the title to them with the application for a new title and all the paperwork. And like I said, there's strict guidelines for this. And I know dealers here in Michigan. I've also litigated against dealers. I've read the dealer manual. And it's very, very clear that when they sell a car to someone, a bunch of paperwork gets done at the dealership, much of which is then sent to the state. And the state keeps track of who's got the car, who owns the car, all that stuff. But the state brings in the old title and creates a new title, okay? And so if it took 201 days, many people, I think, assume this is happening because of COVID. And they'd say, well, I heard the state's backed up because of COVID. But the state can actually look at it and go, well, gee, what day was the car sold? Because that's going to be on a document. And when did we receive the title application? So if the car was sold on the 1st, and they received the title application on the 3rd, they're going to go, okay, that makes sense. But if they sold the title on the 1st and got the title application a couple months later, that's going to be a problem. And I heard, and I've read a lot about this, and it seems that a lot of this is coming from the fact that these cars are being bought and sold and shuffled around amongst the various states. So if you're a car dealer in Bad Axe, Michigan, most of the cars you take in on trade come in locally. Most of the cars you sell are sold locally. So it's a Michigan title coming in and a Michigan title going out. But apparently, some of these online sellers, and Carvana's not the only one, by the way, are buying and selling cars, and they're doing a lot of this on the internet. So someone can do a search on their website and go, I'm looking for a particular car. Oh, there it is. Now, that car may have been from out of state. But they'll get it to you, they'll deliver it to you, right? But the fact that these cars are traveling around like this from state to state does mean that shuffling all that paperwork gets more complicated. So this is one of the things I think that's going on here, is simply that the business is trying to transact business nationally. And so when somebody in Rhode Island trades in a car that sparks the fancy of somebody in Nevada, and they buy the car, for some odd reason, the title from Rhode Island getting to Nevada, somehow there's going to be a hiccup in there somewhere. It just seems to be that way. The woman with the car in Romeoville, the Jaguar, said, I was concerned the car may not be registered correctly and that I could get in trouble. It was stressful. She's one of 7 Carvana customers here in Illinois who reached out to NBC5 with similar stories. NBC5 Responds resolved their issues after contacting Carvana directly. But those same customers are worried about others out there unaware of the problem. And I've heard from people who said, got this car, didn't get the paperwork, I called Carvana, they said, we're going to take care of it, don't worry about it. We're going to take care of it, don't worry about it. The Illinois Secretary of State said customers have issues with the Carvana title registration are urged to file a complaint with the state by calling the Illinois Secretary of State Police. And there's a number, and you can find them on the internet. Of course, they have the Illinois Secretary of State, and the Secretary of State has got its own police. There you go, the Illinois Secretary of State Police. So if it's happened, complain. Don't just complain to Carvana. Complain to the Secretary of State office in the state in which you are. So it appears to be a problem in Illinois such that the state has suspended their license. And we've heard of their problems in other states as well. I think I covered the first time they got suspended. I'm not sure. They all start to blend together after a while. But it is a problem. And I know car dealers, I know a couple, and they tell me that the paperwork they've got to do, not just the stuff that gets submitted to the state, but the paperwork they've got to maintain, and someone from the DMV or equivalent can walk in at any time and say, show me your books. And you got to pull out the police book, for instance, and show them the police book. And then they can say, oh, you sold a car yesterday? Show us the paperwork. They don't need a search warrant. It's something you agree to when you get licensed by the state of Michigan to buy and sell used cars. You got the B license. At any given time, they can have a snap spot inspection. They can walk in and say, show us your books, show us your paperwork. And I've said this before, and it's partly because I'm cynical, and it's partly because it's true, that much of this simply has to do with the taxes, the money that goes to the state. So when you sell someone a car, there's sales tax. The sales tax has got to get submitted to the state. And every single year in Michigan, there are car dealers that run into financial trouble and don't want to send those taxes in immediately because they need that money for something else. They spend it and they got to sell a car tomorrow to pay the taxes for the car they sold yesterday. And it gets like that until it gets out of control. And that's what the Secretary of State's office is most worried about here in Michigan, I believe. Do they want customers to get the titles to their cars? Of course they do. Do they want their money? Yes, they do. So when they walk in and do the snap inspection and they look at your police book and there's cars that aren't on your lot, where'd they go? Oh, they got sold. Oh, they got sold. Was the paperwork submitted yet? It wasn't. Why not? So that's a scary prospect if you are a car dealer. But if you're Carvana right now, you can't sell cars in Illinois until you get this resolved. And it's going to be harder to get this one resolved than it was to get the last one resolved, because last time you simply promised to stop doing it. This time it's going to take more. And what might more be? And you might wonder, Steve, what might more be? Which, out of context, that sentence makes no sense until you understand that more is in quotes. What might more be? And for instance, they might agree to let a third party come in and audit what they do. They might say, hey, how about this? Let's get somebody to come in and oversee our operations that you guys agree that you would trust, and will revamp our system doing whatever this person advises. Something like that. Now, I don't know if they can do that with a statewide operation or a nationwide operation, but I've heard of situations before where a business got in trouble and they said, hey, bring in somebody to, in essence, force us to be in compliance, like a babysitter for a little while, and see if that solves the problem. I don't know what they'll do here. This is an interesting one where some attorneys for Carvana have to get really creative to try to work this out, because I suspect that they would normally sell a lot of cars in Illinois. Illinois is what we call a populous state. So there you go. Jeff, Suze, Brian, Gordon, Neil, and Darren all, thanks for sending it. NBCChicago.com ran the story. For the second time, Carvana is banned from selling cars in Illinois. Questions or comments, put them below. Let's talk to you later. Bye-bye.
Thank you for watching Lehto's Law. To be or not to be? That's not really a question.